The committee will come to order. Mr. Kucinich.
I have a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Please state your point of order.
Under Rule 11, Clause B, the use of the committee broadcast system shall be fair and nonpartisan. And my point of order is that since the majority has signs up behind Mr. Cummings, which reflect your point of view and not ours, and since this is being broadcast, and you can see the signs behind Mr. Cummings, that it would be fine, it's fine with me, and I'm sure our side, if you want to put all your signs over there that reflects your point of view, but by having them up behind Mr. Cummings, it's actually taking a partisan, assigning to him a partisan position, since the sign's right behind him. And therefore, my point of order relates to Rule 11, Clause B.
Okay. Noting your point of order, the Chair is prepared to rule. Within the committee rules, it is the signs and other areas of this room are within the discretion of the Chair and are not appealable. However, the gentleman's point relative to broadcast will be evaluated for broadcast appropriateness. The sign is not within the scope of the gentleman's point of order and thus is not appealable. However, we will evaluate in consultation with the ranking member as to broadcast procedures which this doesn't affect, but which we certainly want to make sure that we stay within the point of order that you raised, which is, again, not within the scope of that sign. However, we certainly would like to have a review of broadcast procedures to see if there are any concerns by the Chair as to broadcast. With that, we would begin based on another discretion of the Chair.
Mr. Chairman, did you sustain my point of order then? Or?
No, actually, since it's within the discretion of the Chair, it's not subject to a point of order, and we'd be glad to give you the line that shows that it's a discretion.
Well, I hope you're able to work it out because it seems to me that we have a violation of that rule. Thank you.
Thank you. And I thank all of you here today for your patience. This is a time in which the committee has been preempted by the discussion of funding of the government, and nothing ultimately can be of more importance to the American people than whether or not our troops in harm's way continue to be funded after Friday. With that is the discretion and policy of the Chair that we begin by reading our Oversight Committee mission statement. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is the mission of the Government Oversight and Reform Committee. Today's hearing is on the United States Postal Service, where publicly traded today's hearing is on the United States Post Office and the new contract. Were the Post Office a publicly traded company, it would be among the 30 largest in America, having revenues of $70 billion. Its 30-plus thousand post offices exceeds that of Starbucks and McDonald's combined. Over the years, the Post Office has gone from a growing and thriving industry, able to sustain positive cash flow and effectively positive profits. That is now in our taillights. Today, members of the active workforce enjoy approximately $11,000 worth of legacy burden into their pay, meaning that when the Post Office looks at its cost of doing business, it in fact has legacy costs that very much resemble General Motors before its bankruptcy. The Post Office cannot and will not renege on its promises to those already retired. We cannot and will not renege on the obligation that we have to the American people, both under the Constitution and under hundreds of years of tradition of the Post Office. Every day, 6 days a week, the American people expect that a letter will be delivered directly to their box in front of their house, down the street, or often in a chute in their door. The contract negotiated, not yet ratified, is intended to allow the continuation of a history of collective bargaining, but compromises sufficient to allow the Post Office to emerge from what is at best a break-even, and by some estimations, a $5.5+ billion loss, and to get to a positive position able to meet all of its obligation, both present and legacy cost, in the foreseeable future. This contract falls short of that goal. It is very clear the intention is good. The Postmaster has worked diligently to get some concessions. However, we will hear today that we, in fact, under current law, may not be able to negotiate the contract that needs to be negotiated. Additionally, from this position on the dais, we have deep concerns that some of the provisions of the contract might in fact be the wrong direction, toward less flexibility, less ability to trim the workforce, and less ability to make the kind of investments in the future that we need to make. Having said that, this committee stands ready to make legislative changes that may be needed in order to secure for the Post Office the kind of abilities to reinvent itself it needs. Additionally, this committee in the past, on a bipartisan basis, has been willing to delay certain required deposits in order to allow the Post Office time to regroup. At the same time, the hundreds of thousands of letter carriers and postal workers deserve to have a level of certainty that allows them to plan their future, a future in which the Post Office is able to deliver efficiently a product in a reasonable cost and, in fact, meet its obligations. To that extent, we intend to hear from all the participants that we can over a period of time. Today, we have 4, but I assure you, both at the full committee and the subcommittee, we will be hearing many, many, many more. And with that, I recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
I want to thank the Chairman for yielding and for this hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Postal Service is the nation's premier mail delivery service, providing universal service to the American people at fair and reasonable rates. Last year, the Postal Service delivered nearly 40% of the world's mail, serving 150 million United States residences, businesses, and post office boxes. Although the Postal Service generated more than $67 billion in revenue last year, it faced serious financial challenges recently. Since 2007, its revenues have declined because of reductions in mail volume, increasing energy prices, and the recent downturn in the United States economy. The Postal Service reported losses of $5.1 billion in 2007, $2.8 billion in 2008, $3.8 billion in 2009, and $8.5 billion in 2010. I'm encouraged that the Postal Service is taking significant and serious steps to address these challenges. Last year, the Postal Service issued a new 10-year strategic business plan that improves productivity, cuts costs in operations, uses more cost-effective retail channels, and consolidates administrative functions. With new leadership in place, we're beginning to witness the emergence of a smaller, smarter, and more nimble organization that is reinventing itself to become more competitive in an evolving marketplace. With this in mind, there are some key points I would like to emphasize. First, the Postal Service pays salaries that are comparable to the private sector. A recent review found that the Postal Service letter carriers received a starting salary that was slightly more than FedEx carriers and slightly less than UPS drivers, both on an initial per-hour basis and after several years of service. I might note that behind me is a chart that says that 80% of the Postal Service money goes into employees. And it's interesting that this very committee, Mr. Chairman, 87% of our money goes in for personnel expenses. Second, the Postal Service has been aggressively reducing its workforce. The current workforce is the smallest in 20 years, employing nearly 100,000 fewer workers than in 2008. Since 2000, the Postal Service has reduced its workforce by nearly 27%. Let me say that again, 27%. And it plans to continue reductions through attrition and by extending its current hiring freeze. Third, the Postal Service is actively examining additional proposals to further reduce costs. For example, GAO recently recommended a host of cost-cutting measures, including a legislative proposal to modify the Postal Service's mandated requirement to pre-fund retiree health benefits. Currently, the Postal Service is the only federal entity required to pre-fund retiree health benefits, and these costs are expected to average, ladies and gentlemen, $5.5 billion annually through fiscal year 2016. Mr. Chairman, as we discuss these proposals today, I would like to offer a note of caution. More than 200,000 members of the American Postal Workers Union are in the midst of voting on a tentative labor agreement concluded with the Postal Service on March 14, 2011. This agreement would institute a two-year freeze on wages and cost of living adjustments, and it is projected to save approximately $1.7 billion. It would allow the Postal Service to reduce the starting salary of postal clerks even further from $40,800 to $35,300, and it would implement one of the recommendations made by GAO by allowing greater use of non-career and part-time employees. While it is appropriate for this committee to conduct oversight of the Postal Service, we must be very, very sensitive to criticism that we are using today's hearing to improperly shape the outcome of the impending vote. Both management and the union have negotiated in good faith, and we should allow workers to consider this tentative agreement without undue congressional intervention. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank all the postal employees for their dedication and for their hard work. For the 6th consecutive year, the Postal Service, above all other government agencies, continues to be named as the most trusted and reliable government agency by the American people. That's a hell of a compliment. The Postal Service is also one of the largest employers of veterans in our country, with approximately 22%, or about 114,000 employees, veterans, having previously served in the United States Armed Forces. Moreover, approximately 40,000 of these employees are disabled veterans. I feel strongly that our committee should focus not only on stemming recent losses at the Postal Service, but on pursuing options to create a healthy and profitable Postal Service for the future. And a key component of this new organization must be a reasonable and livable wage for these devoted and trustworthy public servants. Once again, I say to every single member of the post office community, we thank you for what you do every day, rain or shine, delivering our mail, dogs biting you, rain, sleet, hail. We thank you over and over again, and may God bless you. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. By previous agreement, we will now recognize the ranking chairman, or ranking subcommittee, the subcommittee chairman and the subcommittee ranking member. Mr. Ross, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you for this hearing. Today, the committee will hear from the Postmaster General and 2 of the presidentially appointed Board of Governors who will attempt to lay out their vision for a substantive postal workforce and describe how the APW contract fits into that vision. This will be the first time in a decade that multiple USPS governors will appear together at a congressional hearing. We know that the Postal Service is one of the largest organizations and employers out there. It has more than 500,000 employees, and that exceeds all of U.S. companies except for Walmart. It has a phenomenal marketing and delivery infrastructure where it goes to every consumer, or it goes to 150 million consumers every day. Unfortunately, due to the ongoing digital revolution, the business model of the Postal Service is fundamentally broken. It is losing billions of dollars every year and now stands on the brink of insolvency. This is not just a short-term problem, as the Postal Service projects growing deficits for the foreseeable future. It is incumbent upon the USPS to develop and implement a new business model as soon as possible. I commend Mr. Donahoe for what he has done. His commitment to implement a comprehensive strategy that will reduce costs by undertaking major organizational restructuring, reviewing post office closures, and adjusting delivery frequency. I hope we can empower you to do more. At 80 cents on every dollar, workforce costs make up a disproportionate share of Postal Service costs. These costs must be addressed head-on as part of any serious reform effort. Among these costs are a large postal compensation premium that has been estimated at 34%. In fact, in 2001 arbitration decision, neutral arbitrator Stephen Goldberg stated, quote, "In concluding that there exists a Postal Service wage premium, I join a long list of arbitrators in prior USPS interest arbitrations who have reached the same conclusion." Close quote. Regrettably, the tentative contract USPS recently announced with its largest union, which represents over 200,000 employees, maintains and expands no layoff protections, guarantees wage increases, and ensures that USPS employees continue to pay a lower portion of health care premiums than do other Federal employees. USPS claims the contract will save them $3.8 billion over its 4.5-year life, but I am skeptical of that. However, as this chart shows, assuming that all these savings are achieved, it hardly makes a dent in projected USPS deficits. Given this, it is unclear how this deal, which would serve as a template for deals with other USPS unions, will give USPS the ability to immediately reduce workforce costs and maintain solvency. One of the Board of Governors testifying today is James Miller, who is a former head of OMB. In contrast to other USPS executives, Miller has expressed disappointment with the APW contract and only endorsed it as the best possible under a broken arbitration system. In a paper Mr. Miller included with his testimony today, he also outlined options for reforming postal collective bargaining and noted econometric analysis has found USPS employees are paid a significant premium relative to their private sector counterparts. I look forward to hearing from Governor Miller and the rest of the witnesses. I would like to thank the Chairman again for this hearing, and I do yield back.
I thank the Chairman. And with that, we recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for helping the committee with its work. A little over a month ago, the Subcommittee on the Federal Workforce, Postal Service, and the District of Columbia held a hearing on the financial condition of the Postal Service, and the news at the time, as most of you know, was less than encouraging, although it was a bit better than what we saw last fiscal year. At the conclusion of this year's first quarter, the Postal Service had a net loss of $329 million compared to a net loss of $297 million for the same period in fiscal year 2010. However, if you exclude the cost of pre-funding future retiree health care benefits, as the ranking member has pointed out, a burden that no other agency or private business in America is required to carry, and you add the non-cash adjustment to the Postal Service's workers' compensation liability, the Postal Service would have actually ended the first quarter with a net income of $226 million, a gain of $226 million. Further, over the past couple of years, we have witnessed the Postal Service and its employees work to improve efficiencies and reduce costs by over $10 billion. Since 2008, the size of the Postal Service workforce has decreased by over 100,000 employees, which is probably why many observers point out that the Postal Service actually stands as a model for the rest of the Federal Government in terms of lowering costs and right-sizing its workforce and network. The tentative agreement recently reached between the Postal Service and the American Postal Workers Union is the latest example of postal management and its employees working together to ensure the future viability of an entity that serves as a cornerstone of a trillion-dollar industry and supports over 7.5 million private sector American jobs. However, let us be clear that there are certain aspects of the Postal Service's compensation and benefits costs that are out of the organization's control. Specifically, I am referring to the hardwired health care benefit payment schedule that forces the Postal Service to pre-fund future liability at an overly aggressive rate, again a requirement that no other agency or company in America must shoulder. On top of its prepayment obligation, the Postal Service is also subject to Federal employee pension rules and guidelines which have resulted in the potential overpayment of both its civil service retirement system and its Federal employee retirement system. So in answer to the question, are postal workforce costs sustainable, which is the subject of this committee, the answer, I guess, is it depends. It depends if we believe in universal service. It depends if we believe in a reliable manner of delivering the mails. It depends if cost to the consumer will be reasonable. And it depends on whether or not this country still respects its workers and is willing to treat them with basic dignity. For this reason, I, along with Congressman Cummings and other Democratic members of the committee, have introduced H.R. 1351, the United States Postal Service Pension Obligation Recalculation and Restoration Act of 2011. H.R. 1351 directs the Office of Personnel Management to update the actuarial methodology to be used in calculating CSRS retirement benefit liabilities between the United States Postal Service and the Federal Government in accordance with modern actuarial practices and accounting standards. Any resulting surplus from the recalculation would then be transferred over to the Postal Service Retiree Health Benefit Fund. Lastly, H.R. 1351 will require that the Postal Service's already agreed upon FVRS surplus of nearly $7 billion also be refunded immediately by applying the following: $5.5 billion towards the Postal Service's fiscal year 2011 retiree health benefit payment, $1.2 billion towards the Postal Service upcoming workers' compensation payment, and any remaining balance toward paying down the Postal Service debt. Since it is the job of this committee to find ways to help ensure the Postal Service remains a valued and viable entity well into the future, I urge all of my colleagues to consider co-sponsoring this fiscally responsible legislation. That said, I look forward to a constructive and honest discussion on this important topic, and I thank all of the witnesses for coming and providing their input in this morning's hearing. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. All members will have 7 business days to submit opening statements and extraneous material for the record. Without objection, so ordered. We now recognize our distinguished panel of witnesses. The Honorable Louis J. Giuliano.
Giuliano, very good.
Don't want to mess that one up. Right. Is the Chairman of the United States Postal Service Board of Governors. The Honorable James C. Miller III is a member of the Board of Governors of the United States Postal Service. Mr. Patrick Donahoe is the Postmaster General and Chief Executive Officer of the United States Postal Service and a frequent visitor. And Mr. Cliff Guffey is President of the American Postal Workers Union and critical to today's hearing. Pursuant to the committee rules, all witnesses are required to be sworn. Would you please rise to take the oath? My script says to tell you to raise your right hand, but that usually goes without saying. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, but nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Would the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative? Please be seated. Gentlemen, in order to allow time for hopefully everyone on the dais to ask you a series of questions, we'd ask that your entire statements will be placed in the record. In some cases, you may choose to work off of them, but if you choose to use your 5 minutes for other material, you'd be well served, because then you'll have your cake and submit it too. With that, please try to summarize during the yellow light appearing in front of you and conclude as quickly as you can when it goes to red. During the question and answer session, because we have a large gathering today, I will have a fairly quick gavel. What that really means is if someone is still answering questions until a few seconds before the end of the time, I may say that you have to give a very short answer, not anything more than a yes or no, or I'll reply for the record. On the other hand, if you are in the process of making an answer, no matter how long as it is necessary, I will allow you to continue until you've completed your answer. So that incentivizes people up here to quit talking in time for you to have a full and complete answer. Additionally, if somebody would like to also answer a question after the time has expired, it will be the general policy to allow one additional person to comment afterwards. I hope that allows us to average 6 or 7 minutes on a 5-minute per member basis, which is about as tight as we can hold it and be fair to both you and to the members. So with that, Chairman, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As we have talked about, my name is Lou Giuliano, and I serve as Chairman of the Board of Governors of the Postal Service. This is my first opportunity to testify before you, and I thank you for the privilege. The Board shares the concerns expressed by members of the committee about the financial losses at the Postal Service. We also appreciate the fact that some in Congress are concerned about our labor costs, and in particular, the tentative contract that has been negotiated with the American Postal Workers Union. For these reasons, we feel today's hearing is critically important, and the Board of Governors applauds your willingness to explore these issues in depth. The tentative contract with the APWU is the best that was achievable under the existing law. Failure to reach a negotiated agreement places us in binding arbitration, an outcome that, Mr. Chairman, we believe would not have allowed us to realize most of the benefits that we did gain in this contract negotiation. This is especially true as it pertains to flexibility of the workforce. The tentative agreement provides the Postal Service with 3 important things: immediate cost control, a flexible workforce, and long-term structural change. The Board unanimously supports the tentative agreement, which will produce a cost savings of $3.8 billion during its life. We believe that both labor and management have demonstrated their determination to right this ship in these negotiations. We also appreciate the fact that we urge the committee to consider other actions that are necessary to protect the financial viability of this important American institution. On the top of this list is the Retiree Health Care Benefit Prepayment Program. First, let me be clear. We have been and will continue to pay our fair share of health care costs for our employees and retirees. But the $5.5 billion of accelerated payments for future retirees, many of which who have not ever even been hired, mandated in the 2006 PAEA, are an extraordinary burden that no other organization, neither public nor private, is required to make. They constitute a hidden tax that is neither fair nor responsible. We have been repeatedly told that our prepayments for future retiree health care benefits is a scoring issue. During the last 4 years, from 2007 to 2010, we had total net losses of $20 billion. This would have been a total profit of $1 billion had we not paid and expensed $21 billion of retiree health care benefits. Instead of owing $12 billion today, we would have $9 billion in the bank. Only Congress can correct this problem, and I believe it is in everyone's interest to do so. If action is not taken to address the situation immediately, the Postal Service will default on our payments on or before September 30th of this year. Despite the overpayment of almost $7 billion, we continue to have to pay $3 billion per year into the FERS system. We are told that only a change in the law can fix that. The workers' compensation regulations that we work under are cumbersome, unfair, and costly. We have liabilities that no other company that I am aware of or organization would have. Workmen's compensation represents a $12 billion liability to the Postal Service, and it cost us over $1 billion in cash last year. We ask you to consider the legislation that has been introduced in the Senate to address this issue. It is a government-wide problem. We also require action to create a more flexible delivery schedule. We would prefer not to have to go to a 5-day delivery schedule. But when considering the alternatives, we consider it the best. It is the only way and a significant way to help offset the decline of first-class mail. Management has demonstrated the ability to drive significant improvements in its processes and reduce the size of the postal workforce. while improving service levels and adding new delivery points every year. The tentative labor agreement negotiated with the APWU is a solid step to reducing labor costs. We are hopeful that we will achieve further flexibility in our negotiations with our other 3 unions. We are eager to work with Congress to effectively resolve these and other major issues. It is my hope that as by working together, we can enable this venerable institution to reshape itself to meet the future needs of the American public and leave a legacy about which we can all be proud. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Governor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Jim Miller, and I'm responding to your invitation to testify today. Chairman Giuliano speaks for the board. He is chairman of the board. And to the extent that the views I express differ in any way from those that Governor Giuliano expresses or expressed by Postmaster General Donahoe, please list those as my own personal views, and they shouldn't be attributed to any other governor or to the Postal Service management. While I'm on the subject of the Board of Governors, I wish to emphasize that it works in a very collegial fashion. There are 4 Democrats right now and 4 Republicans appointed by President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. But we work in a very nonpartisan way, and we work very, very hard. Now, thank you for holding this hearing. As Governor Giuliano outlined and other members of the Congress have outlined, the U.S. Postal Service is in dire financial shape. Without some miracle, as Governor Giuliano pointed out, we will default. We will be insolvent and default on September 30th. We will default on the debts that we owe the United States government at that point. And I respectfully submit that only you can avoid that fate. I have submitted, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Ross, Chairman Ross mentioned that I have submitted a short statement and an attached paper. Let me just say that the point I make in that paper and in my statement is, as Chairman Ross said, the current model for the Postal Service is broken. It's inapplicable. You have a demand that is shrinking. You have the high-profit mail, first-class mail, shrinking. And there just isn't the opportunity to earn those kinds of profits on the high-class mail to subsidize all of the other things that we have done. To survive, the Postal Service needs systemic reform. Financial relief, in my judgment, is not enough. We need systemic reform. We need freedom to operate as a commercial enterprise. Now, I realize that some misgivings have been expressed about the latest APWU agreement. My response is that we did the best we could under existing law. Our current system, from all the evidence that we have in times that we went to compulsory arbitration, is that the system is biased in favor of labor and against management. The unions know this, and we know this. And so in our decision to accept the best we could get with our negotiations or go to arbitration, we had to keep this in mind. And so we accepted this agreement as the best deal we could get. And I respectfully submit, Congressman, members of the committee, that if you want a better deal, you have to change the law. Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting me here today. I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Donahoe.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's an honor to be here today to testify about the tentative agreement between the Postal Service and the APWU. I appreciate the invitation to testify about such an important development for the Postal Service. For the past several years, the Postal Service has been responding to an unprecedented 20% decline in mail volume. We have been extremely aggressive in managing costs throughout this period. Since 2008, we have reduced 110,000 employees, and $11 billion in costs. We recently announced a reduction of an additional 7,500 managerial positions, a 35% reduction in that group since 2008. Our full-time career complement today is 572,000 employees. We will continue to reduce the number of full-time career employees, thereby reducing our legacy costs. By 2020, the Postal Service workforce will be less than 400,000 people. Through process improvement and personnel reductions, we have taken the necessary steps to bring costs in line with declining revenue, and we will continue to do so. More than 8 months ago, the negotiating team began bargaining to shape the labor contract for 202,000 career employees. The parties negotiated long and hard and dealt responsibly with tough issues. We sought and we were able to achieve greater workforce flexibility, immediate financial benefit, and long-term structural changes. One of the most important aspects of the tentative agreement is that it provides significant workforce flexibility. We will be able to schedule our employees in ways that make sense for a variable workflow business, and we will be able to increase the use of non-career employees. I would like to impress upon this committee that neither side was willing to take the easy way out or simply roll the dice and leave our respective fates to a third-party arbitrator. We need the flexibility to properly schedule our workforce, and we achieved that. Interest arbitration is not going to result in flexibility gains of this magnitude. This tentative agreement also provides for immediate financial benefit by freezing wages for the first 2 years and leads to a wage savings of $1.8 billion over the term of the agreement. We negotiated structural changes that result in a two-tier pay schedule for new employees that is 10.2% below existing schedules. We also will be able to increase the use of non-career employees from the 5.9% today with restrictions to a totally unrestricted roughly 20%. These changes provide a benefit of $1.9 billion. I look forward to negotiating with our other 3 unions to gain similar results. While it's the nature of negotiations that neither side got everything that they want, I will tell you it is the best possible outcome that we could have achieved given the legal framework of which we operate. This is a responsible agreement. America needs a healthy postal service and a healthy mailing industry. And although we've seen declines in the use of mail, the mail and physical delivery are extremely important and always will be. Mr. Chairman, while this morning we're discussing our tentative agreement with the APWU, it is important to recognize that our labor agreements are but one element in a larger strategy to return the Postal Service to profitability. Let me assure you I am doing everything possible to take costs out of the system as quickly as possible, and I will continue to do so. Our business model is inflexible. We need reform in the laws that govern us. We must get beyond the mandates that require us to pre-fund retiree health benefits, to overfund our Federal employee retirement system, and to deliver mail 6 days a week. Congress plays an important role in our future. The Postal Service is reducing costs, and we want to work with Congress to gain the business model flexibility that we need to best serve our customers. Let me close by stating the Postal Service has achieved record service and productivity levels over the past few years while absorbing significant volume loss. The credit belongs to our employees. I will never forget for one moment that we are able to deliver for America, and that is due to the commitment and relentless dedication of our employees. We're in the process of changing many things about the Postal Service to better serve the American public. This contract and your commitment to continued engagement in postal issues will help us meet their changing needs. I'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the Chair would note that you've added one very good member of your team sitting behind you that we all recognize as a leader on this issue, Mr. Strongman.
Yes, and we're pleased to have him. Thank you.
Ron, next time you get up and testify, we'll get you sworn in. Mr. Guffey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am Cliff Guffey, President of the American Postal Workers Union. Postal workers are very proud of the fact that we provide an essential service to the American people. We have faced many challenges over the past decade as a result of the severe economic recession and a decline of first-class mail. From 2008 to 2010, the postal workforce was cut by approximately 110,000 jobs. Thousands of workers represented by the APW were reassigned to jobs far from their homes and families. This resulted in severe hardships for these workers and their families. Despite all this disruption and all this hardship, postal workers' productivity has increased, and on-time service to the American public has remained at excellent levels. APW approached the labor negotiations that prompted these hearings with one primary test in mind: what will be right for the employees we represent, the Postal Service, and the American people it serves. It is a testament to the value of collective bargaining that the APW and the Postal Service have reached a tentative agreement that meets this test. It gives the Postal Service an opportunity to return to postal employees work that has been contracted out to save money doing it. Under this agreement, the APW will compete aggressively to return work to bargaining unit employees, work that is being performed at a greater cost by contractors and in some instances by higher paid non-bargaining unit employees. The tentative agreement also protects the livelihoods of the people APW represents, people who have dedicated their working lives to provide postal services to the public. Postal employment has been and continues to be an important source of middle-class employment opportunities. The Postal Service employs more than 129,000 veterans in its career workforce. In 2010, these veterans were 22% of the postal career workforce. 49,000 of these veterans are disabled veterans, and 13,000 of them, including me, are rated as 30% or more disabled. In 2010, women were approximately 40% of our workforce, and minorities were approximately 40% of the workforce. I am proud of the fact that this tentative agreement protects the livelihoods of these and all career postal workers. A review of these negotiations of postal history will show that since the passage of the Postal Reorganization Act of 1970, postal wages have closely tracked inflation. Meanwhile, Postal Service productivity, including labor productivity, has consistently increased. As a result, postal ratepayers have benefited from excellent service at low postage rates. Since 1970, postage rates have not gone up any faster than the prices in the economy generally. If this committee wants to help the trillion-dollar-per-year mailing industry, it should relieve the Postal Service of the burden of pre-funding retiree health benefits and correct the overfunding of CR, SR, and FERS. But for the unique and unreasonable and unnecessary requirement to pre-fund the retiree health benefits, the Postal Service would have had a substantial financial surplus over the past 4 years instead of a substantial deficit. No one could expect postal employees or postal ratepayers to shoulder the cost of paying billions of dollars into a Federal trust fund unnecessarily. That is a problem that requires a legislative solution. I would like to add that here the Congress is again holding hearings on the symptoms of the problem, holding hearings on Social Security, which is a symptom of the problem, holding hearings on unemployed veterans is a symptom of the problem. The problem in this country is the economy. The economy that sets up trillions and trillions of dollars to be shipped overseas, while in America, on our side of the ledger, we have more unemployment, underemployment, lowering wages, and people losing their homes and mortgages. We have problems, our national deficit, trillions of dollars for people overseas and trillions of dollars of deficit here. You correct the problems in the economy, and the Postal Service will take care of itself. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize myself for 5 minutes for a round of questioning. Mr. Giuliano, you said several times things along the line in your opening statement of no company would have to bear this. Isn't it true that a company would have to, under law, fully fund its liabilities in real cash transfers for a defined benefits program? Isn't the pension law one in which you must pay in advance every day for what you eventually will pay out for in retirement and in health care, if that's part of your benefits plan?
The big difference in this case, Congressman, is that no company that I'm aware of would be required to pay for future retiree health care.
Okay, well, maybe we'll go to Governor Miller. Isn't it true that every company that has a defined benefit plan does have to pay for future retirees, not future employees, which you said, which we'll look into, but General Motors, I can recall taking I think it was $5.5 billion hit one time by a change in accounting rules that caused them to have to recognize more into their defined benefits plan. And ultimately, by the time they went into bankruptcy, that was their greatest cost differential between themselves and the Japanese, was having to pay into these defined benefit plans. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. To my knowledge, your characterization is accurate.
So maybe the question here today for this committee, which also oversees FERS and so on, is shouldn't every government entity have to fully recognize, at least on paper, the legacy costs they're creating today with employees who will retire in the future? Is there anyone that disagrees with at least accounting for that? I understand your concern is paying for it, but does anyone disagree with the accounting of knowing what the future costs were going to be? Well, let me ask it. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think you make an important point. We are a commercial enterprise, so we have a bottom line. Most government agencies are not, so it would be an accounting entry. But to have Congress and everyone else recognize that government agencies, other government agencies, have these liabilities would be a good idea.
I think that's something this committee needs to look at broadly, is the truth in accounting of what our legacy costs would be. Mr. Donahoe?
If I could comment too, Mr. Chairman. I think there's a couple things we have to look at here. Number one, when you look at the entire retirement liabilities that the Postal Service has, we feel that we are overfunded into the Civil Service Retirement Fund. I know Mr. Lynch has got a bill coming up to ask the GAO and the White House to go back and look at those accounts. Somewhere between $50 and $75 billion from our estimates and two separate actuaries.
Mr. Donahoe, the question for you, since the administration, I understand, has already rejected the argument, you're asking them to go back and re-look at something they've already rejected.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You know, I think it was Einstein that said that if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, that's the definition of insanity. Let me take my limited time and go on with just a couple of more things.
Mr. Chairman, if I...
No, please. There'll be plenty of time for follow-ups. But, Mr. Donahoe, you said, and Mr. Miller said, and I think Mr. Giuliano said, that this was the best you could do under existing law. Isn't it true that in binding arbitration, two provisions could not have happened? The provision for insourcing janitorial services that Mr. Guffey referred to as, outsourced at a greater cost, and I object to it being a greater cost. If it is, then we need to address that. But that could never have been achieved except through this agreement, the insourcing. That was not, in fact, a part of the collective bargaining. It became part because it was put on the table. Also, in the case of a change from a statutory approved category of people that were not eligible to be under collective bargaining to this new category who most assuredly will become eligible under collective bargaining. As I understand it, the provision that you negotiated creates an absolute requirement. If you don't join the union, you lose out on $3,000 of free benefits. So isn't it effectively that this new category of workers that was estimated to be 35,000 at the end of 1 year immediately costs us at least 3,000 more before you do a pay raise, so that by year 3, our estimation is this group will cost you more, not less. Mr. Donahoe, would you want to comment on that? Mr. Miller?
I'd like to comment on a couple of things. First of all, we set out in this agreement to achieve three basic strategies.
No, I appreciate all of that, and you'll get plenty of time on that. But one, isn't it true those two items could not have been done by mandatory arbitration? They couldn't have ordered those two changes.
In mandatory arbitration, it is a roll of the dice. We maintain.
Okay, Mr. Miller, would you disagree with that? In arbitration, could those have been on the table? They weren't part of the collective bargaining agreement. Could they have become part, essentially mandating new union employees in a new category?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is that if a provision was part of the package that the union was advancing, the arbitrator could take these items and include it in the final determination.
But historically, arbitration is about the pay and benefit of those covered, not those not covered. So the likelihood, at least from the advice I'm getting, is that there were two things which increased the number of Mr. Guffey's union workers, and that is that you're substantially insourcing 4,000 people who previously were just contract employees to clean and do other janitorial work, and this category that now will most assuredly be added to the union and undoubtedly be in the next bargaining contract asking to be treated fairly and equally with their brothers. Mr. Donahoe, if you could answer briefly.
First off, it's important to note that we maintained all outsourcing provisions in the contract going forward. What we looked at in the case of the custodial employees was the financial benefit to bring the work back into the Postal Service with the newly negotiated substantially lower wage rates. We did that with everything we looked at from an insourcing standpoint. We compared costs like we do with everything. We always keep our eye on the bottom line.
Okay, and my time has expired. I want to be thoughtful of that. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much. You know, it's very interesting when you look at the fact that since 2008, there have been a reduction of 100,000 employees. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of families. And, you know, as I listen to what has been going on this morning, you know, sometimes, you know, you can begin to cut to the bone. At some point, you begin to cut through the bone. Last year, the Government Accountability Office released a detailed report on options and strategies that could potentially improve the Postal Service's future financial viability. A significant portion of the study focused on reducing the Postal Service's compensation and benefits costs. For example, the GAO study recommended creating a two-tiered system that would pay new hires lower wages while grandfathering current employees under the existing pay system. Mr. Donahoe, how does the tentative labor agreement reached between the Postal Service and the APWU carry out that recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. We have two things that we've been able to reach agreement with the APWU in terms of flexibility and structural change. The first is we've been able to negotiate a percentage of each of the crafts represented by the APWU. 20% of the clerk craft, which is the largest portion of the APWU, will now be non-career flexible employees. We have 10% in a motor vehicle and 10% in maintenance. So that's one large structural change, as you've noted with the GAO study. The second thing we've been able to do is negotiate an entry wage rate of 10.2% less that never changes. It's a two-tier wage rate going on from now until a person retires from the Postal Service, again, giving us an opportunity for financial relief and flexibility going forward.
So you mean that new person coming in will make 10% going through?
Forever.
Forever?
Forever.
And what impact will that have on the postal system? I'm just curious.
Well,
with the last piece there.
The last piece, what we were concerned about was long-term structural change. In the short term, in the next 3 or 4 years, we will continue to hire very few career employees. But when you get out to 2016 through 2020 and out beyond that, as you hire career employees, you will be able to save that differential.
GAO also recommended greater use of non-career or part-time employees going forward in order to reduce the Postal Service's compensation-related expenses. The Postal Service's 10-year strategic plan made similar recommendation. What steps has the postal system taken to accomplish this goal? And I remind you that this committee itself, 87% of our money goes to employees. You are at 80%. Are you trying to reduce that further?
Well, what we do, being the labor-intensive organization we are, we constantly look to shrink the pie. So you'll always be higher from a percentage standpoint. The idea is you're trying to shrink the total cost. And we've accomplished that through a number of ways, the productivity improvements that people have noted, headcount reductions, as well as this negotiation. Going forward, from a flexibility perspective, I mentioned the percentages before that we've been able to work out with the APWU. The other big change is the fact that within our regular employment structure, we are working with the APWU to provide flexible assignments. Currently, you have a number of people that will work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day on the same schedule. Our needs change daily. We've been able to work out an agreement with the APWU that provides flexibility, work hours anywhere between 30 to 48 a week with changing hours daily. That meets our customers' needs.
President Guffey, if ratified, the tentative contract you negotiated will bring the new APWU career hires in at a much lower pay scale. What does this new pay system say about the Postal Service and the APWU's commitment to reducing compensation? Because we keep hearing people banging on public employees, and it seems to me that this is going a long way. People are literally making less money. I know that there's a freeze. Is that right, Mr. Donahoe, For 2 years?
Yes, sir.
Is that right? So, I mean, I'm just wondering, you representing your union, I just want to know how, what does that say about your union?
First, I'd like to correct one thing that was Mr. Ice had said. He said that they'd have to join the union to get this health insurance. Our health insurance plan that we're providing to the non-career people is a nonprofit plan that is low cost, and no one will have to join the APW to get the benefit of that plan. In other words, the parties decided that was I insisted that these new people would have to have insurance, and so we would provide them the lowest cost, but we cannot require these employees to join the union to get that insurance. This part of your follow-up answer, as a labor organization, we have no desire to destroy the company that we work for. We entered into these negotiations knowing that the Postal Service was under dire financial strait by the pre-funding requirements and that we would have to work our way through it. And in doing so, we wanted to ensure the future. Now, and some of the other corrections are that we discussed in flexibility, the old work rules that were 5 within 8. That may not allow the Postal Service to keep windows open, say, to 6, 7 o'clock, and by doing so, turning away customers. So we allowed them to do this without overtime. A lot of other issues.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. It's called shared sacrifice. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mack, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I, for one, like the placement of your signs and hope that members on the other side, if you don't like the signs, then maybe help us craft solutions to change the signs. Last month, Mr. Donahue, last month when you were here testifying, you acknowledged labor costs as a large contributing factor to the Postal Service budget problems, and that your #1 priority was to address these costs. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So since your last visit, what steps have you taken to reduce the amount, 80 cents on every dollar, that the USPS spends on labor costs?
As we've been talking here today, Congressman, one of the things that we focused on going forward is our overall comprehensive plan, which addressed labor costs, among many other things. We have worked through a very good agreement with the APW to reduce labor costs in a 4.5-year period at a minimum of $3.8 billion. Since the last time,
let me ask you a question. Sorry, and I'll let you continue on it. But this is the best deal that you could have struck under current law.
Yes, sir.
But now you're saying that it is a good deal. So regardless of the current law, you think this is a good deal?
This is the best deal that we could struck under the current law. We think it allows the Postal Service to continue to reduce labor costs while giving us the opportunity to increase flexibility. That was our goal going into these negotiations.
If the law was changed, could you would you consider a better deal?
I'll tell you, if you would change the law, I would love to see you address retiree health benefits, my FERS overpayments, and our delivery flexibility. That's where the big money is.
In your negotiations with the American Postal Workers Union, is it true that you extended your policy not to lay off workers with 6 years of experience and also guaranteed that there wouldn't be any layoffs for an additional 7,000 workers?
Yes, we did. And I'll tell you why we did that.
That was my next question.
I'll tell you why we did that. Our goal in this negotiation was workforce flexibility, immediate cost reduction, and structural change. We know that you don't get that through an arbitrated decision. So we originally approached the APWU at the very beginning and talked about layoff clause, and I will leave Mr. Guffey to provide his side of the story. But we got the immediate feedback that that was a non-starter. So our feeling was we wanted to go ahead and get a negotiated contract that achieved our goals. The other thing that you have to keep in mind, when you throw things into arbitration, you lose time. It could have taken us 1.5 years. And the money that we were able to negotiate out of these labor costs would have been delayed to perhaps 1.5 years, and we would have never got the same kind of a deal that we got through negotiations.
So I heard, as the panel, as all of you in your testimony, continue to say the best deal you could get under current law. Have you asked the committee for changes to current law so you can strike a better deal with the unions?
There have been recommendations made in the past.
In writing to the committee?
No, sir, we have not.
Well, if you're going to come here before the committee and say, we need changes to the law so we can strike a better deal, then maybe you ought to submit what those are to the committee in writing so we can have a discussion about what those changes are.
We will submit those along with the other recommendations to relieve the Postal Service of the mandates that are really causing this problem.
So if you're going to default September 30th, why is it taking this so long to ask for changes to the law so you can strike a better deal?
We have been asking for changes to the law for the past few years, Congressman, and will continue.
But never in writing to the committee.
We will follow up in writing with you.
No, not to me, to the entire committee.
To the Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, that would be helpful. So the last question is, I guess, so I just got a nice little article in my on my iPhone here talking about a post office that is going to be closed on Vanderbilt Beach Road in my district. So wouldn't it be better that negotiations with the unions would take place in such a way that people wouldn't lose their jobs, but we were able to get some of the costs under control?
I'd like to answer that question. Here's what we're looking at from a Postal Service access and convenience standpoint, and that's what we're focusing on. There are many different ways that you can provide access to the American public. What we have to do as part of our financial responsibilities that we've laid out in our comprehensive plan is look at how much money we spend to provide that access. When you read about closing a post office, what we're proposing to do is take a good look at each community where we don't have enough revenue coming in and perhaps
I understand
provide that service in another way.
But for the unions themselves, I mean, it sounds like the heads of the union would rather see people lose their jobs than to renegotiate contracts.
Part of the NCE, the lower cost employee that we've talked about, would help us to maintain post office operations. What we're looking at is much smaller places where you don't even have any union employees, where you're looking at trading off, say, a postmaster for a contract at a local store, where we can provide better access at a lower cost. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. With that, we recognize the former chairman of the full committee, Mr. Towns, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank you for having this hearing. And also let me just sort of commend the Postal Service for the outstanding job that they've done under these adverse conditions. And let me tell you that they're definitely adverse, and no doubt about it. And to think about the fact that you've already eliminated 100,000 positions since 2008, I mean, that within itself. Let me begin by saying, asking, I guess, you, Mr. Miller, in your written testimony, you mentioned that the Postal Service has taken steps to strengthen its revenue base by offering more services and acquiring more clients. You also mentioned providing services in response to customers and entering into partnerships with other service providers. I am very interested in the concept of offering different services other than mail delivery as a means of creating a strong revenue source. Like every other large private entity, the Postal Service needs to adapt to the changing times in order to remain financially and viable in the future. We know that the Postal Service already takes passport applications. I would like to see this expanded to other things. Could you give us some examples of additional services that can be provided that would result in a reliable income stream for the Postal Service?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for raising that. When I wrote that, I had in mind the mailing services, the new mailing services that we have initiated. You know, for example, the box that you see advertised on television a lot. It doesn't matter how much it weighs, if it fits, it ships. Things of this click and ship, things of this nature. I think what you're talking about are products that are ancillary to our business.
Right.
I think my own personal view, as long as we have the monopoly on mail, I'd be careful about going beyond that. And as an economic proposition, I'd be careful about going too far. For example, there have been people that suggest that we get in the banking industry, banking business. I think that would be disaster. But on the other hand, some things that you were hinting on, like the passports and things of this nature, I think there are other opportunities that we have that perhaps do not fit within the current legislative definition of permissible services that might be considered? And I'd have to discuss that with my colleagues, but I think that there might be an opportunity for us to consider that and get back to you in writing, Mr. Chairman.
Right. And let me just say this, too, in that hearings like this is to sort of get information, get ideas, and to see how we can work together. It's not about whether you sent us a letter already or not. It's about what you need to send to be able to move forward from this point on. So I don't want to get mixed up here. I want to make certain that we stay focused on what we really need to focus on. So on that point, Mr. Donahue, what is it that we can do here on this side that you think that needs to be done in order to help you to become viable?
The key issue is to address the congressional mandates around the retiree health benefits, to address the overpayment of FERS, and to allow us the delivery flexibility. Those are the key things for us going forward. I will say this. We have been very responsible stewards of this organization. We take very seriously our requirements for the American public for service and our requirements for the American public to provide efficient service. Just what the Chairman said, one of the visions of your committee. So we take that seriously. What we need is your help on these big issues that are beyond our control. We have excellent employees. We've got excellent working relationships with our 4 unions and our 3 management associations. We know how to get things done. The things that we can't control are the mandates, the $5.5 billion in the retiree health benefits. Get those things out of the way, and you will never see us again. All you hear about is accolades about how good of an organization the U.S. Postal Service is providing service to the American public.
Well, let me say this. I think you're serious about it because you hired one of our best in terms of
we know that.
Ron Stroman. So I think you're committed. On that note, Mr. Chairman, I yield back unless there's somebody that disagrees with the fact that there should be additional services. You should not think about additional services. If anybody disagree with that, then I would like for you to just respond very quickly.
I think that to the Chairman's point, he mentioned all the facilities that we've got out there. There is plenty of opportunities in our lobbies to provide services for other people to come in. We are exploring those. There's definitely opportunities. We know there is still a ton of value in the mail, and I guarantee you we'll work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now recognize the Chairman of the Transportation Committee and a longtime member of this committee. Senior? No, you're too young to be senior. Mr. Mica, for 5 minutes.
That's just using a lot of "just for men," so look that way. I don't know if our witnesses noticed, but the group that's been feeding dinosaurs from the House of Representatives is no longer here. And unfortunately, it looks like the Post Office is somewhat becoming a dinosaur. It's not your fault, you know. Everybody's got one of these, and you get most of your messages. I didn't send any letters to my nieces and nephews today. I sent them an email. I noticed you, from what I read and heard when I was sitting in the back, you've got 572,000 employees, and it should be down to 400,000 just to deal with the kind of traffic that you have now. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you have I didn't see a specific plan on how you get rid of 172,000. I saw the average cost is $89,845 per employee today. You did mention how you get rid of some of the cost for the 572, but that still doesn't help the math. The other thing, you're $6 billion in the hole this time, right?
Yes, sir.
And I understand. I asked, well, how are you financing that? And they said you got sort of a line of credit with Treasury for $15 billion. That runs out in September. What's going to happen in September when we stop feeding the dinosaur?
We don't pay you.
Pardon?
We don't pay the Federal Government all that it's due.
So just default?
Yes.
We will deliver the mail. The Postal Service.
Speaking of delivering the mail, Saturday and Tuesday, is that all off the
No, we are still very interested in working.
Which is it going to be?
It would be Saturday. That's the best day.
But we've been talking about these things. We talk about them. Some years ago, I had the opportunity. Actually, I went down to the post office. I think I forget who the Postmaster General was. I mean, we had to just about buy him Depends at the time because he'd never seen a member of Congress in his office. But I was stunned by the vacant desks, and they took me around and showed me how many people they got rid of. Usually, if you look at some of the overhead, now you got a lot of postal people on the ground, and people do have to do a good job, and they do a good job in delivering. But sometimes you can get rid of the administrative overhead. Do you have a specific plan for doing away with that?
Yes, sir. We have been
How many have you got in the administrative positions?
We have been very focused on that. We have administratively about 15,000 people, and that includes everybody from operations to
How many have we got in Washington, D.C.?
About 1,100. We just are going through a process reduction here right now, sir. We're reducing 20%.
So I could come down and see a lot more empty desks?
I will tell you this. You'll see empty buildings. In the past 2 years, we have taken 4 buildings, eliminated the leases, moved them into the building we're in now, and we're downsizing again.
Well, that's the big picture. On the local level, and you know, you hear from members. I've tried not to contact you on some consolidations or take a position because you got to do your thing, and it's tough. Hundreds of people show up at these things, but maybe, I don't know if you could sit down with members or others that are close to the subject. I can give you examples. I've got a post office in St. Augustine, Florida. I've been trying for 8 years to get you out of a congested corridor where you can't move traffic, where it's expensive to operate. Just the traffic backup and trying to get in and out just doesn't make sense. But I don't have time. I used to be a real estate developer. I could put a deal together in no time. But you ought to have some people. My observation is the post office doesn't initiate anything on the local level to bring about cost-effective changes. I could put you in a retail center. I got tons of vacant space, but somebody has to have the brains to put this together. I've tried peripherally, and I don't have time to cut these deals. We did one in DeLand, Florida years ago, and that was a huge success. It revitalized the whole center and that side of town. I've got Daytona Beach. Here's another example. I've gone from 1,100 bureaucrats in Washington and 15,000 down to smaller projects. Daytona Beach, you've got a post office. It's a beautiful site in downtown, and it's had the second floor vacant. I tried to get some folks in there, talk to people about doing something with it, and it sits vacant. So, you know, we produced in our committee a report called "The Federal Government Must Stop Sitting on Its Assets." I don't think we had a chapter in there for you, but maybe we could write one.
I would be more than happy to come over and sit down and walk through all the buildings that we've sold, vacated land deals we've got. We've got a couple of great ones going on. Mr. Lynch up in Boston, we're talking with some opportunities right now. We've got a lot of those things done, and I'm open to any other suggestions you have.
Well, I applaud you. And the big one's fine. We need to have a better handle on getting rid of excess property, excess space, excess employees. And last thing would be buyouts. What's the status of buyouts?
We do have an option on the table for some of the people that we're working through right now with the downsizing, and the buyout provision would be $20,000, and it would be paid over a 2-year period. So that spreads our cash out.
For how many?
We have the offer up to 8,000 people. We don't think anywhere near that will take it.
Okay, you're still about 160,000 short. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and I might note that you probably haven't heard in your committee about their sales because they get to keep the money unique to the post office that they sell and internally use those dollars. With that, we recognize the distinguished gentleman from the metropolis of Cleveland, Mr. Kucinich.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. In listening to this discussion, what strikes me is that I haven't heard the people who are in charge with managing the post office about the moral obligation that you have to those who delivered the mail for 20, 30 years or more with respect to their full health benefits and their full retirement benefits. And people are retired, and they put all that time in. For the life of me, I don't understand why they should have to go begging to the government to assure that all the things that they worked a lifetime for are going to be there. I keep hearing this theme. I had steel workers in my office the other day tell me that now they got to deal with the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. They're going to be lucky if they get 40% of their retirement benefits. See what's happening here is, by the way, Mr. Donahue, is it your goal to see the Postal Service privatized eventually? Is that what?
No, it's not my goal. My goal is to provide excellent service.
Okay, let me ask you some questions. Okay, have you met with people concerning broader privatization of Postal Service functions? Have you had any meetings about that?
I have not.
Have you or anybody else, any of the governors, Mr. Giuliano?
Congressman, as part of approximately 2 years ago, when we started looking at all the alternatives that we put into our comprehensive plan, we looked at all the alternatives. One of those was privatization. Another part of it was other types of products. The conclusion—
that's all I wanted. I just wanted to see if somebody had some meetings and talked about privatization, because I think what's going on here is that there's actually an attack on this very idea of universal service. Because once you privatize, then you can legitimatize knocking down wages and benefits, cutting services. Look, it's already started. I don't know about any of you, but in my neighborhood, you've seen post boxes taken out of neighborhoods. Then you see branches closed. I've seen private delivery service boxes outside of branches. What's that about? You're operating with 100,000 less employees, so your jobs are cut, wages aren't moving up, and the burden here in these discussions seems to keep focusing on the workers. I like that Mr. Towns raised a question about trying to find ways of bringing some income in to assure the Postal Service. But the tone of these hearings, characterizing this service as something that's so much in the past that it's a dinosaur, really belies the fact that millions of Americans rely on this as a service. You might be able to communicate by email, but not everyone does. We understand there is a huge social divide in America in terms of people who use the Internet to communicate and those who do not. And you know, we want everyone working together, have to do that. I'm glad to see you're negotiating. And from what I see, it sounds like it's in good faith, and you're trying to solve within the context of the system. But, Mr. Guffey, are you concerned that these kind of talks, these kind of hearings, could be trying to set the stage for a privatization, broader privatization of the Postal Service? Could you speak into the mic and turn your mic on?
I believe it's leading to an attack on the labor movement as a whole, just as the workers in Wisconsin, the firemen, the teachers, and the police and the state troopers are being attacked in those states.
But what about the Postal Service?
Same in the Postal Service. I believe that's what's happening. I'd like to say there is great opportunities. You know, the Post Office is where the flag flies in every little community across this country. Opportunities for putting in other government services into the Post Office is there. Doing the TSA work, the verification work that TSA could do, could be done in the local post offices.
Could you give this committee, through the Chair, of course, the ideas that you've presented that can expand the revenue of the Postal Service? Could you do that?
Sure.
And I just want to add this in my 15 seconds that are left. You're right about this broad attack on workers, but it's also an attack on the public sphere. If you look at the Michigan bill, it sets the state for broad privatization of everything that's owned by the public. People pay for it once and they end up paying for it again through privatization. And inevitably, the cost of the service goes up, quality of the service goes down. I thank you. Yield back my time.
Money goes for personnel expenses. Second, the Postal Service has been aggressively reducing its workforce. The current workforce is the smallest in 20 years, employing nearly 100,000 fewer workers than in 2008. Since 2000, the Postal Service has reduced its workforce by nearly 27%. Let me say that again, 27%. And it plans to continue reductions through attrition and by extending its current hiring freeze. Third, the Postal Service is actively examining additional proposals to further reduce costs. For example, GAO recently recommended a host of cost-cutting measures, including a legislative proposal to modify the Postal Service's mandated requirement to pre-fund retiree health benefits. Currently, the Postal Service is the only Federal entity required to pre-fund retiree health benefits, and these costs are expected to average, ladies and gentlemen, $5.5 billion annually through fiscal year 2016. Mr. Chairman, as we discuss these proposals today, I would like to offer a note of caution. More than 200,000 members of the American Postal Workers Union are in the midst of voting on a tentative labor agreement concluded with the Postal Service on March 14, 2011. This agreement would institute a two-year freeze on wages and cost of living adjustments, and it is projected to save approximately $1.7 billion. It would allow the Postal Service to reduce the starting salary of postal clerks even further from $40,800 to $35,300, and it would implement one of the recommendations made by GAO by allowing greater use of non-career and part-time employees. While it is appropriate for this committee to conduct oversight of the Postal Service, we must be very, very sensitive to criticism that we are using today's hearing to improperly shape the outcome of the impending vote. Both management and the union have negotiated in good faith, and we should allow workers to consider this tentative agreement without undue congressional intervention. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank all the postal employees for their dedication and for their hard work. For the 6th consecutive year, the Postal Service, above all other government agencies, continues to be named as the most trusted.
For your patience, this is a time in which the committee has been preempted by the discussion of funding of the government, and nothing ultimately can be of more importance to the American people than whether or not our troops in harm's way continue to be funded after Friday. With that is the discretion and policy of the Chair that we begin by reading our Oversight Committee mission statement. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is the mission of the Government Oversight and Reform Committee. Today's hearing is on the United States Postal Service, where publicly traded today's hearing is on the United States Post Office and the new contract. Were the Post Office a publicly traded company, it would be among the 30 largest in America, having revenues of $70 billion. Its 30-plus thousand post offices exceeds that of Starbucks, and McDonald's combined. Over the years, the Post Office has gone from a growing and thriving industry able to sustain positive cash flow and effectively positive profits. That is now in our taillights. Today, members of the active workforce enjoy approximately $11,000 worth of legacy burden into their pay, meaning that when the Post Office looks at its cost of doing business, it in fact has legacy costs that very much resemble General Motors before its bankruptcy. The Post Office cannot and will not renege on its promises to those already retired. We cannot and will not renege on the obligation that all the participants that we can over a period of time. Today, we have 4, but I assure you, both at the full committee and the subcommittee, we will be hearing many, many, many more. And with that, I recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
I want to thank the Chairman for yielding and for this hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Postal Service is the nation's premier mail delivery service, providing universal service to the American people at fair and reasonable rates. Last year, the Postal Service delivered nearly 40% of the world's mail, serving 150 million United States residences, businesses, and post office boxes. Although the Postal Service generated more than $67 billion in revenue last year, it faced serious financial challenges recently. Since 2007, its revenues have declined because of reductions in mail volume, increasing energy prices, and the recent downturn in the United States economy. The Postal Service reported losses of $5.1 billion in 2007, $2.8 billion in 2008, $3.8 billion in 2009, and $8.5 billion in 2010. I'm encouraged that the Postal Service is taking significant and serious steps to address these challenges. Last year, the Postal Service issued a new 10-year strategic business plan that improves productivity, cuts costs in operations, uses more cost-effective retail channels, and consolidates administrative functions. With new leadership in place, we're beginning to witness the emergence of a smaller, smarter, and more nimble organization that is reinventing itself to become more competitive in an evolving marketplace. With this in mind, there are some key points I would like to emphasize. First, the Postal Service pays salaries that are comparable to the private sector. A recent review found that the Postal Service letter carriers received a starting salary that was slightly more than FedEx carriers and slightly less than UPS drivers, both on an initial per-hour basis and after several years of service. I might note that behind me is a chart that says that 80% of the Postal Service money goes into employees, and it's interesting that this very committee, Mr. Chairman, 87% of our
The committee will come to order. Mr. Kucinich.
I have a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Please state your point of order.
Under Rule 11, Clause B, the use of the committee broadcast system shall be fair and nonpartisan. And my point of order is that since the majority has signs up behind Mr. Cummings, which reflect your point of view and not ours, and since this is being broadcast, and you can see the signs behind Mr. Cummings, that it would be fine, it's fine with me, and I'm sure our side, if you want to put all your signs over there that reflects your point of view, but by having them up behind Mr. Cummings, it's actually taking a partisan, assigning to him a partisan position, since the sign's right behind him. And therefore, my point of order relates to Rule 11, Clause B.
Okay. Noting your point of order, the Chair is prepared to rule. Within the committee rules, it is the signs and other areas of this room are within the discretion of the Chair and are not appealable. However, the gentleman's point relative to broadcast will be evaluated for broadcast appropriateness, the sign is not within the scope of the gentleman's point of order and thus is not appealable. However, we will evaluate in consultation with the ranking member as to broadcast procedures which this doesn't affect, but which we certainly want to make sure that we stay within the point of order that you raised, which is, again, not within the scope of that sign. However, we certainly would like to have a review of broadcast procedures to see if there are any concerns by the Chair as to broadcast. With that, we would begin based on another discretion of the Chair.
Mr. Chairman, did you sustain my point of order then? Or?
No, actually, since it's within the discretion of the Chair, it's not subject to a point of order, and we'd be glad to give you the line that shows that it's a discretion.
Well, I hope you're able to work it out because it seems to me that we have a violation of that rule. Thank you.
Thank you. And I thank all of you here today. We have to the American people, both under the Constitution and under hundreds of years of tradition of the Post Office. Every day, 6 days a week, the American people expect that a letter will be delivered directly to their box in front of their house, down the street, or often in a chute in their door. The contract negotiated, not yet ratified, is intended to allow the continuation of a history of collective bargaining, but compromises sufficient to allow the Post Office to emerge from what is at best a break-even, and by some estimations, a $5.5+ billion loss, and to get to a positive position able to meet all of its obligation, both present and legacy cost, in the foreseeable future. This contract falls short of that goal. It's very clear the intention is good. The Postmaster has worked diligently to get some concessions. However, we will hear today that we, in fact, under current law, may not be able to negotiate the contract that needs to be negotiated. Additionally, from this position on the dais, we have deep concerns that some of the provisions of the contract might, in fact, be the wrong direction toward less flexibility, less ability to trim the workforce, and less ability to make the kind of investments in the future that we need to make. Having said that, this committee stands ready to make legislative changes that may be needed in order to secure for the Post Office the kind of abilities to reinvent itself it needs. Additionally, this committee in the past, on a bipartisan basis, has been willing to delay certain required deposits in order to allow the Post Office time to regroup. At the same time, the hundreds of thousands of letter carriers and postal workers deserve to have a level of certainty that allows them to plan their future, a future in which the Post Office is able to deliver efficiently a product in a reasonable cost and, in fact, meet its obligations. To that extent, we intend to hear from all the